This video will cover the principles of the digestive system. The digestive system is an extremely organized system with intricate parts, allowing us to eat virtually anything and break it down and absorb it into the bloodstream, into the body. It has four basic processes. The first is called ingestion, and this is taking in food. Ingestion, when we take food or anything from outside the body to inside the body, it's called ingestion, taking in food. The second thing then is to break down those macromolecules into smaller molecules, smaller nutrient molecules, and that's called digestion. Breaking down food. Digestion. Thirdly, we absorb. Absorption, which is the movement of nutrients from the GI tract to the bloodstream. Students often get these two confused, or sometimes they're used interchangeably, but actually digestion is breaking it down, which we need to do first. Then after the food is in small enough molecules, then they can be moved from the GI tract, from the stomach or the small intestine, to the bloodstream. So first we take it in, then we break it down, then we move it to the bloodstream, and then finally the fourth one is defecation. And this is excreting or ridding the body of the food that is either not useful, the unused food, or indigestible waste. Okay, so ingestion, digestion, absorption, and finally defecation. And we take a look here. Here we're looking at the organs of the digestive system. We got the mouth, we got the tongue, we have salivary glands, we have the esophagus, we have the pharynx up here, the esophagus. We got the stomach, we have the small intestine, the large intestine, and then we have a few more organs that this ingested food doesn't necessarily flow through, but is critical to breaking down the food. We got the liver, we have the gallbladder, and we have the pancreas. The GI tract, when we say the GI tract, we're talking about the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine, or not even really including the mouth. That's the gastrointestinal tract, or the alimentary canal. This is where food actually flows through until the end. So the next question is, what are the anatomical regions of the alimentary canal? So let's see if you can remember in order what the food flows through. First, number 1, the mouth. Number 2, the pharynx And if you remember, we've already covered that in the in the uh, in the respiratory chapter, the pharynx. So if this is the mouth here, and this is the nose up here, this whole region is the pharynx. It's another cavity, it's another space that connects where only air should go, and where food and water and air should go. This is our nasopharynx. This is our oropharynx. Oro for oral, mouth. This is our oro space, oropharynx. And then finally our laryngopharynx down here. Food enters through the mouth, enters through the pharynx, specifically the oropharynx, down into the laryngopharynx, and then finally this epiglottis will close down on the glottis, ensuring that food will travel down posteriorly, not anteriorly. Posteriorly to the esophagus, not anteriorly to the trachea, to the larynx and trachea. If we're just breathing, then we can breathe air through the mouth, we can breathe air through the nose, and then it can go down the trachea. Of course, we can also, swallow air and go back, but what's most important is that food doesn't go forward, it goes backward to the esophagus. So the second is the pharynx. The third is the esophagus. And try to say these before I do. After the esophagus, what do you think? Down, 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 the stomach. The fifth part is the small intestine. The small intestine. And this can be broken into three parts. The first part is sort of unique. It's a straight piece, and that's called the duodenum. And this is where the pancreas secretes digestive enzymes into the first part of the small intestine. Okay, and we also have the second piece, which is called the jejunum. And the jejunum is where lots and lots and lots of absorption occurs. And finally, the ileum. And the ileum is the third part of the small intestine. So we have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Some people also say the duodenum. All right, we're almost done. We have, after the small intestine, we have the large intestine. I'm not going to require you to know the parts of the large intestine specifically, but we have the cecum, and then going up we have the ascending colon, and when it goes across we have the transverse colon, then it goes down, descending colon, and then it makes a sort of an S, sigmoid colon, and then there's the last little piece called the rectum, and then finally the opening, which is called the anus. And if we take a look at a photo, at a diagram. This is the large intestine, and here's the cecum. So here's where the small intestine will connect to. We have the cecum, and here's our appendix right here. Cecum. And we have the ascending, the transverse, the descending, the sigmoid, the rectum, and then finally the opening is called the anus. Okay. So so make sure that you know the order of the alimentary canal from beginning to end, the digestive tract from beginning to end. All right, very nice. All right, functions. We have to know the functions of each of the parts. The functions of each of the parts. The mouth, in particular, allows us to masticate or chew and this helps with digestion, of course, mechanical digestion. Masticate. The tongue helps mix this masticated food with saliva. The mouth also secretes an enzyme called amylase. Amylase helps break down complex carbs into smaller, simpler carbs. And so we actually have mechanical and we actually have a little bit of chemical digestion right in the mouth. Mostly, we're talking mechanical. Chew, 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 and this is going to help break down the large food molecules into smaller and smaller, so that way by the time we get all the way down to the stomach and the small intestine, the food will be small enough finally where we can absorb it into the bloodstream through our single cells, our simple columnar. All right, so we have mastication in the mouth. The next is the pharynx. If you remember, the pharynx is basically just a passageway from the mouth to the esophagus. It's just a passageway, but it allows air and food and water to pass through. So, and then eventually it splits. If it goes posteriorly, it goes to the esophagus. If it goes anteriorly, that should only be air that passes through into the trachea. So the pharynx is just a passageway for food. All right. The esophagus is next. The esophagus, we're talking about 10 inches long. It goes from the pharynx to the stomach and through the diaphragm, that muscle that allows us to breathe, helps us to breathe. And the esophagus also does what's called peristalsis. Peristalsis. Here is the first region of the digestive system where we see this word, peristalsis. Peristalsis is this slow rhythmic squeezing, and it's the muscle that's going around, the circular muscle that's going around, squeezes and does it in in order to allow food to move in the forward direction. Since we're generally standing up, it's generally in the downward direction. But of course, the small intestine will go back and forth. So, but we could be lying down, we could be hanging upside down on a tree, and food will continue to move in the forward direction because of this action called peristalsis. And if you want to take a look at a nice diagram, we see this peristalsis action in this diagram here. If this is the esophagus and this is our mass of food, which is called bolus, when we chew it up and we swallow, when the tongue forces the food down into the esophagus, it's now, the food is now called a bolus. And the circular muscles that are wrapped around the esophagus do this slow rhythmic squeezing in a consecutive order, forcing food to move in the forward direction. If obviously in the stomach, if you're standing up, in that case that would be so that is called peristalsis. And it's important to know that this occurs actually in the esophagus, it occurs in the stomach, it occurs in the small intestine, and all the way through the large intestine to the end. So peristalsis starts in the esophagus and it occurs all the way through. Without this, it would be very difficult, very, very, very difficult to get food all the way through the body, all the way through the GI tract. It would be very difficult. However, there's another action that the GI tract does, and that's called segmentation. Now, segmentation is also done with this circular muscle, but these contractions don't occur in any particular order. The function of that is to allow food to be broken up. It's a mechanical digestion process to help break food down. But as you see, it doesn't necessarily move food in the forward direction. It just random contractions, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And the point is not to move food forward, it's just to mix food and to help the enzymes get to this broken down food, mix food to then to absorb the food. So if peristalsis occurs at every one of these spots, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine, the question is, where does segmentation occur? Where do you think? Where do you want to have this mixing and mixing and mixing happen? So the answer is, let me just write this down. The answer is in the small intestine. We also have segmentation. And it's important to know that there are two actions that occur in the small intestine. All the rest, we have this what's called peristalsis. So I definitely will need you to know the difference between the two, and know that and know where each of these occur. We have just peristalsis. We have segmentation and peristalsis here, And then finally, in the large intestine, we have just peristalsis. Okay. Continuing on with the functions through the GI tract. Now, we know the function of the mouth. We know the function of the pharynx. We know the function of the esophagus. So far, we've basically just sort of broken up some food and we're moving food. However, in the stomach, we have a variety of things that are occurring. And so we have mixing in the stomach. We have this this term rugi. Rugi are the folds that we'll see when the stomach is empty. These folds, the stomach sort of shrivels up, and then you get these folds. And when the stomach fills with food, the rugi sort of disappear because the stomach is stretched out, and so you don't get that wrinkling anymore. You don't get those folds. So that's an important word to know. When food enters, it enters through this cardioesophageal sphincter here, through this opening. Here's the esophagus up here. And then we have all these different regions. We have the fundus. We have the cardia. These are different regions of the stomach. The fundus, this area here. The cardia. We have the body, which is this main area. Then towards the end, we have another region called the pylorus. And here's the pyloric sphincter. And then finally, if we're exiting the small intestine, we must be entering the if we're exiting the stomach, we're entering the small intestine. And the first part of the small intestine is the duodenum. And so we have two sphincters. We have the cardioesophageal sphincter and we have the pyloric sphincter. This one prevents food from going back up the wrong way. And this one allows food, it opens a little bit at a time and allows, as food is forced through, this opens up just a little bit, allowing just a little bit of food to enter, just a little bit of food to enter, just a little at a time, little at a time. This way, not all the food goes, and see, once the food moves, it continues to move. It doesn't slow down or anything like that. So if you have an incredible amount of food entering into the small intestine all at the same time, you're going to have a very little absorption, very little food that you actually gain, very little energy that you actually gain. Because the enzymes can't work fast enough. You don't, and the small intestinal cells can't absorb into the bloodstream fast enough if you have an incredible amount of food going in. So the stomach allows only a little bit of food at a time. This way we can maximize the amount of energy, calories that we can get from, and vitamins and so on, and minerals from the food that we consume. The function of the stomach, we have mechanical digestion. We also have, the stomach also does some chemical digestion. It secretes some enzymes to start breaking down protein into smaller amino acids. Also, it also secretes a protein called, it's an intrinsic factor, which is needed for the absorption of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is an essential vitamin, and we can only get this vitamin through eating animal products, through animal protein. We can only get this vitamin. It's very important that if you're vegan to understand that you're getting this supplement through some kind of vitamin pill, because we can only get this, we can only absorb this through animal products. It only exists in animals, and it's the stomach that makes this intrinsic factor, this protein, that allows us, when we consume vitamin B12, it actually helps us absorb this into the small intestine. So the stomach also makes this protein. This protein. There is also a particular way that food moves through the stomach, and I just want you to briefly know how this occurs, how the stomach actually does this. And so, as we said, the food moves back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, the first word is that we use, and remember we talked about the stomach also doing this peristalsis. You could sort of say this is peristalsis, but there's a special some more special terms, because in the stomach there's a large sum. The stomach also functions as a storage unit. We can actually put that right in here too. Storage. It is storage for food. When we are resting and digesting, when we are in the sympathetic system, when our sympathetic system is in full gear, these organs work. They turn on. Blood vessels vasodilate, and so these organs work. When we are not in parasympathetic, but we are in sympathetic mode of the autonomic nervous system, when our heart rate is high, our lungs are working, our pupils are dilated, we are either we're nervous or excited, or we are going for a run, we're exercising, we're speaking in front of a huge crowd, we're being chased by a bear. That's when our sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is on. The fight or flight, not the rest and digest. So when we are excited and when our heart is pumping, when we're exercising, for example, these organs actually turn off for the most part. Our blood vessels will vasodilate and take away the blood from here so that these organs actually turn off, and that way we can reroute that blood to other vital organs that are needed to, for example, to escape the bear that's chasing us, or what have you, when we're under stress. So we have that fight or flight mode, or that rest and digest. So when we are in fight or flight mode, the stomach is not running. It's not on. It can actually act as a storage unit for our food temporarily, until finally we escape the bear, or we're done with our public speech, or what have you, or our workout for the day, and then our stomach will turn back on and occur, and the food will begin to work. So the first word, propulsion. And this is this forceful contraction of the stomach, forcing food in the forward direction. Then we have, then at the end of the stomach, at the end here in the pyloric region, we have this word called grinding, where it's a really forceful trying to get food through the pyloric sphincter. And then finally we have retropulsion, which is the food moving back. So we have this propulsion, grinding, and then retropulsion. We have propulsion, grinding, retropulsion. So I want you to be familiar with those three terms. That is occurring in the stomach. All right. And as I said before, there's also some protein digestion beginning in the stomach also. Now, oh, and by the way, did we say anything about absorption yet? Have we said anything about absorption? All we've been talking about is digestion, breaking down. Well, the stomach actually does absorb a little bit of stuff. It's not by any means the main absorption organ, but it does absorb some stuff. For example, alcohol. It does absorb 20% of the alcohol that you consume does get absorbed right into the bloodstream right from the stomach. And that's why people can get drunk so fast, can be intoxicated so fast, because the alcohol is small enough to for alcohol to be absorbed. Here's alcohol. Right here, here's ethanol. So we're talking, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, 9 atoms large. That's ethanol right there. It's very tiny. If it's small enough, it can actually get through the stomach wall and be absorbed. Some drugs, some painkillers can work really fast because they're small enough that they can get through the stomach lining. So the stomach does absorb some stuff, but by no means is this the main organ of absorption. However, the small intestine is the main organ of absorption. Most 95%, most of the absorption that occurs in the body is found right here in the small intestine. Here is where we finally actually gain calories, where we gain the nutrients, where we gain the vitamins, is in the small intestine. Yes, the small intestine also helps to break down because we have segmentation and so on, but here is where we actually gain the nutrients. And remember, absorption is moving food from the GI tract to the bloodstream. That's the small intestine. Also, if you remember the 3 parts of the small intestine, the duodenum is where the pancreas sends pancreatic enzymes, digestive enzymes, into the duodenum. So we have even more enzymes that are being dumped into the duodenum for further chemical digestion. And finally, the large and so here we can absorb fats, we can lipids, we can absorb proteins, we can absorb carbohydrates. And the last piece of the GI tract is finally the large intestine. The large intestine does do some absorption. It does do some absorption. We absorb water here. The large intestine also makes vitamin K. The large intestine does make vitamin K. And here is where the large intestine is where we really see the mass of food build up. If we start, do you remember in the mouth when we swallow? Do you remember the name of the mass of food that we call that a bolus? That bolus goes down, 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 down into the esophagus, down into the stomach. When the stomach mixes that food with digestive enzymes, it mixes and makes a sloppy liquid called chyme. And as that then moves down, as that chyme moves into the small intestine, then that's the consistency that we're talking to. It's a liquid. However, in the large intestine, that liquid then begins to form a mass, and that's where we see the indigestible waste come in handy. Fiber. Our fiber, our water-soluble and water-insoluble fiber come in handy. Where do we get fiber from? Well, we get it from lettuce and celery. This fiber we can't absorb. We don't get any nutrients out of it. However, it's extremely important in our digestive tract. It binds food and water together to make this mass, which is what is excreted out of the body. So what you see there, as the person defecates, that mass you don't see that mass all the way through the GI tract. You see it only forming in the large intestine. The large intestine actually, do you remember when I told you that that vitamin, we don't actually make vitamin B12, we can't get it through any food source except for animals? Actually, to be honest, we actually do make it at the very, very, very end of the large intestine. We actually do make it, but it's past where we can absorb. We can't actually gain this vitamin from it. It's past. And so it's sort of too late to, and then it goes out the body. But it is thought that that's why some animals actually eat their poo to gain that vitamin B12. It's possible that this is actually true. This is sort of the thought. Why don't we ever talk about vitamin K? Make sure to get your vitamin K. Make sure to get your vitamin K. We never say that. You never hear that. That's because the large intestine makes it. You don't have to worry about eating certain foods to get your vitamin K because it's not an essential vitamin. We make it in the body. Essential meaning we don't make it in the body. We have to consume it. Well, we make it. When babies are born, one shot that they give them is vitamin K because their digestive system isn't fully functioning yet, and it's not making vitamin K, so they give them a shot, a dose of vitamin K. All right. So we have the functions of the alimentary canal. We also have the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. The liver has a ton of functions, so many functions, but one function in particular is that it produces and secretes bile. This is a fluid that emulsifies fats. When we consume fats all the time, lipids all the time, through animal products, through plant product, peanuts and bile is there to help emulsify those fats. The liver makes bile, but it is also stored in the gallbladder. So if you ask, well, what's the function of the gallbladder? Does the gallbladder make bile? No, the gallbladder does not make bile. But it does store the bile that the liver produces, that the liver makes. And if you want to take a look here at this diagram, here's the liver, here's the gallbladder, here's the pancreas, this corn-looking thing, and here's the first segment of the small intestine. So the liver is making bile no matter what. Even if this gallbladder is removed, the liver still makes bile and sends it into the small intestine to break down fats. However, the gallbladder, the liver also will send bile up, and it'll be stored through this cystic duct here for storage for meals that have extra fat. If you have a very, very fatty meal, the gallbladder will contract, squeeze, and send extra bile into the small intestine to emulsify that extra fat that was consumed in the meal. In other words, if the gallbladder is, if you get stones and you remove this from the body, you can still have fat in your meal, lipids in your meal. You just can't have too much because you're not going to be able to have that extra bile stored to be released into the duodenum. So we have the liver, which has lots of functions, but in the digestive realm, it makes bile and secretes bile. The gallbladder doesn't make bile, but it does store the bile. And here's our pancreas here, which secretes a huge number of digestive enzymes also into the first part of the small intestine, called the duodenum, allowing the small intestine then to take up those digestive enzymes, break down that chyme, all that food, and finally the small intestine will absorb it. The stomach lining is made out of simple columnar epithelium. Simple columnar, if you remember. Simple columnar. Matter of fact, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine have this inner lining of simple columnar, and that way food really has to go through a large part of the long end, through the long end, and this way it sort of acts like a filter. It has to go through all the ER and the Golgi. There's a lot of filtration here. However, the esophagus actually has stratified columnar. This way, there's extra protection, because food is, imagine, all that friction that occurs every time we swallow food, we'd be bleeding in no time. So the esophagus actually has stratified columnar but the stomach has simple columnar. The small intestine has simple. Very, very briefly, there are 4 layers of the GI tract, which we're talking, and so we're talking the esophagus, the small intestine, and the large intestine. And I just want you just to briefly know what these 4 are. We don't have to go crazy, but the first layer, the innermost layer, where we have that simple columnar that we're talking about, or stratified in the esophagus, we're talking mucosa. The second, and this is the innermost layer. This is the layer right next to the lumen. You know, this is where the food goes, in the lumen. We're talking the very, very innermost layer. We're talking the mucosa. The next is called submucosa. And this is where the connective tissue exists. We have blood vessels, we have nerve endings, we have lymphatic vessels. This is where the submucosa, this stuff is where the submucosa is. Finally, we have the muscularis externus. The muscularis externus. We have an inner circular layer of smooth muscle, and then we have an outer layer, a longitudinal outer layer of smooth muscle. The circular layer is what allows for those rhythmic contractions, if you remember. And finally, a very moist serosa. And this is the GI tract lining, the outermost lining, producing this slippery fluid called serum. That's where that word comes from, serosa. And if you want to take a look at a diagram, just very briefly, we have here, this is what we typically see all the way through the GI tract. And so we have this serosa, we have the mucosa at the very inside, and check out the simple columnar. Then we have the submucosa, which is this next lining here, and so we see lymphatic vessels, we see blood vessels, and nerve endings, and so on, right in here. This is the submucosa. Then we have a muscular layer here, the muscularis externus. And we have the circular layer. If you see the cells, how they're lined up, or going around this direction. And then we have this layer here, the longitudinal layer, where the cells are going the long way, the same direction as the tube, as the GI tract. And then finally, we have the serosa, which is the very, very outermost layer here. This just happens to be the visceral peritoneum. And then on the abdominal wall, we have the parietal peritoneum, made up of the same stuff. Visceral peritoneum and parietal peritoneum. That's your serosa. And those are the 4 regions, the 4 layers of the GI tract. So that concludes the basics of the GI system, of the digestive system. And make sure to delve in, make sure to review, make sure to study every one of these pieces, the functions of the different parts of the digestive system, the regions, the order, and the different terminology that we discussed, like ingestion, digestion, absorption, defecation, and so on. Thank you.